A lively affair there, Joey Jones.
Yes, I always thought that David Cameron might have his work cut out today because there was so much potential ammunition for Ed Miliband to go with. And he did successfully jump from subject to subject today and really keep the Prime Minister pretty much on the back foot throughout as a result of that. And I think that what Ed Miliband did is he actually managed to seize the initiative right from the off in an unusual way, because obviously David Cameron, I mean, the good news this week, obviously, is that no British soldier has been killed since the last Prime Minister's question, so we didn't get the tributes to individual servicemen or women. But Ed Miliband kicked off by offering his sort of festive thanks for all the work that service personnel are doing out there in Afghanistan. It was a well-judged little speech from Ed Miliband, and it was one that David Cameron felt obliged to follow up with and offer similar thoughts as well. But I think it did suggest that Ed Miliband got off on the front foot from right from the outset, and then jumped from subjects like unemployment figures through to health spending, NHS bureaucracy and the education maintenance allowance. First up was whether or not the government would be keeping the pledge to actually maintain real terms rises in the NHS budget throughout this Parliament.
The government's commitment to a real terms increase in health funding will not be met. Now we all remember those posters during the election. We all remember his face airbrushed on those posters. Will he now admit that he's breaking that promise?
Now, the reason that the government is going to struggle with that promise is because the figures that were set out by George Osborne in the spending review did point to a real-term spending rise in health spending and indeed actually school spending as well. But then at the beginning of last week, the Office for Budgetary Responsibility set out revised inflation forecasts. And basically, the situation is that the NHS is not going to get as much bang for its buck. And so rather than a real terms rise, we're now looking at a slight fall. And that is the case in schools funding as well. So how would David Cameron respond to this?
We want to see NHS spending increase by more than inflation every year. I am confident that we will fulfil our goal of real terms increases every year in the NHS.
It will be interesting to see how that confidence is justified, whether or not it means some further injection of cash from the Treasury, or perhaps just hoping that the next inflation forecast in 6 months' time is more favourable. But we'll look to find out more about that. What Ed Miliband was saying is I think we can look at a couple of the jokes that they were going with, some more successful than others. This one perhaps from the Labour leader, a little laboured.
He's breaking his promise and he doesn't want to admit it. What does he want to do? He wants to leave it to the back end of the pantomime horse, the Deputy Prime Minister, to break the promises. It's time the front end of the pantomime horse took some responsibility.
And David Cameron came back with probably, I would think certainly actually, his most successful jibe of the session.
The Honourable Gentleman wants to talk pantomime. I'm afraid it won't be long before he's thinking, look behind you.
But when we talk about pantomime season, then Ed Miliband's final question was an opportunity for the whole audience, or at least for his backbenchers, to get involved. And, I mean, I think this sort of thing that you will hear where it's sort of call and response, some people might suggest it sounds a bit contrived, but it is the sort of thing that buoys the troops on the backbenches.
He began the year making promises and now he's breaking them. The promise on NHS spending, broken. The promise on educational maintenance allowances, broken. The promise on universal child benefit, broken. The promise on knife crime, broken. The promise on new politics, broken. Shouldn't his New Year's resolution for 2011 be to keep the promises he made in 2010?
And if you just pause it there before we look at David Cameron's response, the Prime Minister has been successfully living on his wits over the past few weeks, and I think the House thought that maybe he could come up with a witty response again. Did he manage it?
Mr. Speaker, I think it is put quite simply. They started the year with a leader who was dithering and had no answers on the economy. They have ended the year with a leader who is dithering and has no answers on the economy. I suppose, in Labour terms, that's what passes for being progress.
Not David Cameron's most resonant moment, a little bit tired and lame. That from the Prime Minister could maybe do with a break. So I think that was a successful PMQs generally from Ed Miliband's point of view, particularly because it showed that there was substance where he could get stuck into the Prime Minister, a whole range of subjects, and obviously the sort of thing that he'll be wanting to come back on in the new year. Can I just turn to one other issue, Dermot, that's been going on this morning as well? Ken Clarke, Justice Secretary, has been appearing at the Justice Committee talking about his controversial proposals in terms of sentencing. And, of course, there was a lot of talk earlier on in the week that he had been slapped down by the Prime Minister over his proposal to actually get rid of what is described as Ben's Law, which is the mandatory 25-year prison sentence for anyone who kills someone using a knife. Well, Ken Clarke, in typically laid-back, relaxed form, was adamant that he had complete support across the government for what he was doing.
All the policy, including the documents I've consulted on, including announcements I've made on the court system, on legal aid and on sentencing, have been cleared by all my colleagues. Discussed in cabinet committees, discussed with the Prime Minister, all clear. And so there's no dissent.
So he's completely relaxed in his position. There had been some people speculating that David Cameron might want to get rid of Ken Clarke. He didn't seem to think that. And of course, his criticism, he actually said that some of the criticism of him, that his policies would end up leading to a reduction in the overall jail population, was, quote, a fringe position. That is, of course, a fringe position that is adopted by his former leader, Michael Howard, but also, I think, importantly, by certain sections of the written press that have really have been sticking the boot into Ken Clarke, and I don't think that sort of controversy is going to go away.